All right, good evening, everybody. We've got a bunch of people in the waiting room. A lot of people have been very excited, I premier among them, to be able to spend some time with Doug Chadwick. I want to make sure we still have Doug Chadwick. Good, but you disappeared on my screen there for a minute, and my heart went a little pitter patter.
I haven't been anywhere.
We actually have Doug here in the office. We're socially distanced by two closed doors so that we can be unmasked for you tonight. Such a delight to be regathered as a group. Thank you to people like Janet Brandt and Margaret Notley who have come to every single one of these. And thanks so much for doing that. And people who are new to what we're doing, I'm Doug Mitchell. I have the privilege of serving as the executive director of the Glacier National Park Conservancy. I am joined tonight by my colleagues Jill Bridgman and Emily Evans, and Jill and Emily are going to help us. We have a large group tonight, so we really want this to be a discussion. And so one of the ways we curate that for folks is to use the chat box down below. That's going to be in the center of your screen at the bottom if you're not familiar with Zoom, although I think all of us have gotten perhaps much too familiar with Zoom. And so feel free to use that. If you would like to ask a question, just say, I'd like to ask a question. We can call on you, or if you just want to type in your question, Jill, Emily, or I will go ahead and do that. And we just are so delighted. And one of the fun things I think about this is to be able to have people gathered from, all around the country. And we have people tonight from Whitefish and Big Fork, and I see Eric is here from Cincinnati, and Bonnie from also Ohio, Fairfield, Ohio. I am curious, is there anybody, and Chad actually asked this question, is there anybody here from the Wolverine state of Michigan?
Formerly of Michigan.
I'm sorry?
Formerly of Michigan.
Okay, good. We'll take that. We'll take that. Michigan adjacent. So thanks everybody for joining in again. We're going to spend an hour together with a guy I think is really remarkable, Doug Chadwick, and many of you will have seen a lot of Doug's work. He's been a longtime contributor to National Geographic. He's been involved in 14 books, including the one that we're going to talk about tonight, Wolverine Way, here in Glacier Park. And he's also coming out with a new book he's going to tell us a little about tonight as well. He is a Husky from the University of Washington with a degree in zoology, I believe. That sounds right. And then came to the University of Montana, Missoula, to get his master's degree in biology. And we're just really honored, Doug, to have you join us here at the Conservancy and spend some time talking about Wolverine Way. So welcome.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Do you want to, go ahead.
I was just going to launch by asking you, this is from almost page one. This is a very difficult book to put down. The story that you tell right in the introduction about your early experience seeing the power of the Wolverine when I believe your father took you to a trapper's spot, really was quite a remarkable opening to a book, and it didn't disappoint from then on. But we hear that story, but tell us from that moment to the writing of this book and the research into the Wolverines. Kind of tell us a little bit about your path to this research.
Okay. Well, my father was a field geologist. I was out in camp with him all over the place. I was in Alaska when I was 9, in the Rockies, down on the border of Mexico. So being out in the tent and being in the woods, I was a terrible geologist. I was always turning over the rocks to see what kind of creatures were. But I did research on mountain goats in Glacier Park. I actually worked for the park for a while, and as a biological technician. And then I got a bit frustrated by science and the being, I felt a little confined by the academic approach because there was so much conservation work that I felt needed doing, and I felt that the public wasn't informed enough about some of the what the perspective on what makes these creatures having, why are they having a tough time surviving? What do they need? What should we be thinking about? And so I became more of a journalist, a communicator. And I was thinking about it the other night because I was getting frustrated putting together a bibliography for this new book because it's really dull work. And then I also thought, I'm doing this book because, as you can see, I'm not getting any younger, and I don't have time to go address issues species by species, one by one, place by place. So I took on a book about the nature of nature, and then that got me thinking that, well, because I am getting older, and here's the part I know nobody wants to, or there's like way too much information, but you have to pee more, right? In the middle of the night. So I thought, well, that's actually been a blessing because I was thinking of places on the top of the Himalayas, at 17,000 feet tracking snow leopards, out far in the Atlantic Ocean on a sailboat tracking northern bottlenose whales, and in the Gobi Desert, working with the world's rarest grizzly bears. And each of those places, the sky offered more stars and more light and more of that feeling of being a very small speck in a very big place that we don't understand, and wondering if there isn't somebody on some other planet sitting there thinking the same thing. And I thought, that's a good thing I have to get up and go pee in the middle of the night, or I wouldn't be standing out here with my eyes wide open beholding marvels. So that's apropos of not much. But anyway, my favorite thing to do, other than research myself, has been to go report on it. And when people find out that you are genuinely interested and that you are committed to the facts, and they just open up and you get years of experience and information in a short time. And my favorite thing to do now is just to tag along behind good researchers and convey a lot of the things they're not able to say sometimes, either politically or due to other constraints. I can get mouthy. I can give a sense of the place and the feeling of it that they won't necessarily be able to get out of their scientific publications. And that's a gift. Or it's a privilege, I guess, to be able to do that. And so I take full advantage of it whenever I can. And that was the case with Wolverines. I just found out about a study in the park. I said, I've seen them while I was studying goats. I don't know a thing about them, except they go really fast across mountainsides and up snowfields. And I want to learn more. And then I just got hooked. And for the next 7 years, I was out doing volunteer work in the park, helping track wolverines. So
pretty amazing crew that that worked on that research from Waller to Dan Savage, and that must be one of the things that's really valuable about this work, is those interpersonal relationships that you get to develop too.
Well, things like wolverines and grizzly bears and whales that live in the middle of the ocean attract a fascinating group of people. They're sure not in it for the money, and they're sure not in it for the glory. They're doing it because they're curious. I mean, all of us naturalists are essentially grown-up 11-year-olds, physically grown up, but it's still like, ooh, I wonder what's going on over there. And the discovery is everything. And that's what attracted this group. That and the pleasure of being out in the winter. Sometimes you're the only people in a huge set of valleys inside Glacier Park in January. And it just doesn't get any better than that. So yeah, it was a great bunch of folks, and I was a big part of it.
So you and I talked just briefly a few days ago about this, and I had some visitors here, very highly educated young people who, when I brought out the book, they actually asked quite seriously, so Wolverine's actually a real thing?
It's a small wolf. To a lot of the people I met on the trail.
Right, right. And so I imagine you get a lot of that. I mean, it's not the most common animal that people think about, and I think they mostly think of the Marvel movie.
Well, that was why the book. I didn't intend to write one. I just wanted to go out and help cross-country ski and set up bait posts and put on radio collars and find out what these animals do. And then when we started finding out, I thought these are one of the coolest fauna we've got, not only in the park, but on the continent and on other continents in the Northern Hemisphere. But nobody knew anything about them. And so, wow, it was just one kind of amazing thing after another. And you get up on a given day, on a given morning, and you say, I might learn something totally new today, or the guy next to me will, or the gal next to me. And boy, that keeps you going for a long time. And well, I'll leave it at that, because I don't want to ramble on. I know people have got questions.
Well, and speaking of research on other continents, I noticed that we are joined tonight by Rebecca Waters, who is doing part of the cutworm moth study here in the park, which is super fascinating. More on that, I'm sure, in another event later. But Rebecca, if you just share just for a minute, Rebecca is the founder of the Mongolian Wolverine Project and the director of the Wolverine Foundation. And thank you for also taking a little bit of time out of your schedule to be with us tonight.
Is she
Thank you
muted?
so much for inviting me to join you. Can you guys hear me?
We got you.
You gotcha.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Thank you again for the invitation to join you. I think as I came into the Wolverine research world, Doug Chadwick had just published his book, and it was kind of this amazing route into better understanding how cool it was to be part of this community of researchers. So it's really a pleasure to be here tonight. Yeah, I do Wolverine research in Mongolia, and I'm happy to answer any questions about the differences between research here in Mongolia or the similarities. Yeah, just it's great to be here. Thanks again.
Cool. Yeah. Hey, thanks for joining us, and thanks for the work that you're doing in the park this year on the cutworm moth study. Tasty, small, but apparently tasty, since they provide up to 50% of the grizzly bear's caloric intake. So more about that later. It's a project we've been very proudly supporting, research project, a 3-year research project this year. So thanks for doing that important work. Jill, it looks like we might have a couple of questions that have come in.
Yeah, we've been getting some great comments and questions. Lots of praise for the book. Thanks, Shelley and Bonnie, for your comments. We did just get one question from Stacy. She said, I loved your book. Is there any update since the book on the corridors and on the project in general?
There's not an update in print, but there is an update for tonight, which you may have heard, but Wolverines, look, I never got around quite to saying the other thing that led me to write a book was when I realized how amazing these creatures are. They're one of our charismatic megafauna, right? Most of our fauna is about that big in the world. It's insects and so on, but these guys are spectacular and nobody knew anything about them, and worse, they were declining. They've been declining for some time, and in fact, they were eliminated by 1920s or so, and then they started coming back, had a bit of a dispersal, and then they were kind of on the downhill trend again. And nobody's paying attention because nobody knows anything about them, and you can't care about a creature if you don't know the first thing about it. So that was part of it. And during the period of the Glacier Park study, there were a few more scattered reports of wolverines showing up in another great national park, North Cascades. And there were enough reports that they finally got the forest combined with the Fish and Game over there to start a research project, much like we were doing, capturing wolverines in box traps, getting radios on them. And it turns out that this is a genuine recovery over there. Now, a genuine recovery for wolverines is like, there may be 40 or 50 animals in that whole part of the Northwest, but that's from zero. And they just made their way down to Mount Rainier National Park, and a female had kits there. And that's the first time in a century that that's happened. They're all native to all these mountain areas on the coast and here in the Rockies. So that's some of the best news. The other is that there was a study led by, it was kind of a multi-agency team around, and Rebecca could tell you more about it because she was part of it, but they were picking up wolverines here and there in a number of unexpected areas. It doesn't mean there's more of them than we thought, or they're dispersing more than we thought. I think it means we're paying more attention and we're looking for them. And there are enough cases of young wolverines traveling 500-600 miles from where they were born. They're probably looking for a date. They're at least looking for a territory. And so that's not unusual. I'd say any place there are mountains in our region, you could have a wolverine show up. The question is, where have they established a viable population? And the only place I know in the Northwest there has been getting across Highway 90 and down into Mount Rainier National Park. But that could be the start of something big. So that's probably the best news I've got. There isn't a lot because there isn't much in the way of wolverine research. It just doesn't, they say they're charismatic, they're spectacular, but they still don't have enough of a fan club, I think, and or an economic value or whatever it is that brings in big research grants and allows people to go out and learn more about a creature. And I know you saw this figure in the book, a lot of you, but there's still probably no more than 300 to maximum 350 south of Canada. That's a very small and vulnerable population with a very modest number of breeding females in it. So they're still on the ropes. And so a little thing like coming back in the Pacific Northwest, maybe they'll connect with the ones over here in the Rockies. That's a pretty big deal.
Yeah. Bethany also had a question that kind of ties into finding that motivation to keep fighting for conserving this species. She wrote, your frustration for these animals and the lack of public knowledge does come through in your writing. So she asked, how have you managed to stay motivated and to keep fighting for conservation in the face of some of those frustrations?
Oh, boy, that's a big question. Isn't it? I can't help it. How about that? I'm on the board of the Vital Ground Foundation, which is a land trust, so we can go out and we can actively buy easements, conservation easements on property, or sometimes buy land outright in key wildlife areas. That's something solid at the end of the day. You know, when you write, you just cross your fingers and say, I hope it encourages somebody else to do something. But the tangible thing is, yeah, we got, at this point, 650,000 acres of habitat set aside. That's encouraging. You can see progress. It's certainly difficult to see it politically right now. I'm on the board of an international foundation, the Liz Claiborne Art Ortenberg Foundation. We do the same thing that wolverines need and grizzly bears need here for elephants and lions and jaguars and snow leopards and critters all over the world. Large landscape level conservation through connectivity. And that keeps me going too. If I weren't doing those things and we were just talking about it and lobbying for it, that would be much harder. But it's also one reason I volunteer on studies. I volunteered on killer whale studies and on harlequin duck studies and other things where I go out and I'm on the ground, I'm seeing the animals, I get to know them. That's an incentive in its own. Watch a wolverine as long as you can. It's usually not very long before they disappear over a mountain, but there, you know, just a glimpse of them. And if you get more like 15 minutes or 20 minutes to actually kind of enter their world, my mouth still falls open and I go, I'm here and I'm staying until I kick me out, because, and I can't turn my back on this stuff.
I think that's a good segue, and we've got kind of maybe even a statistically significant group of people here. Let's get a couple of Wolverine stories. Who's seen a Wolverine, and kind of tell us about that experience, when and where. Bethany, did you raise your hand? No? Just grabbing water. Okay, all right. I'll be, yeah. Okay, I need a Wolverine story. Randy, Nora, Susan Atkinson.
Can you hear me?
We got you.
Well, this was interesting because this was about 5 years ago at Mount Rainier National Park, where I know I saw a Wolverine. I felt like it was scrambling across a very sloped snowfield fast, looked like a dog, bear, something. And I reported it to the naturalists there, and it took us a good back and forth over 6 months for them asking questions to pin down and tell me, to my crestfallen disappointment, that it was a marmot. And I still believe that I saw a marmot. I still believe.
I think you saw a buck-toothed Wolverine that hibernates. Look, if it makes you feel any better, I'm supposed to know something about Wolverines, but I can't tell you how many times I've looked across a tailless slope or a mountain subalpine slope, and at a distance seen what I swore was a Wolverine, and then I got up close enough and said, "Oh, it is a marmot." But,
yeah. So I've kind of just got an almost saw one story, I guess. I kind of wish it was, never will know. But the news about the Cascades and the Wolverines coming back into Mount Rainier is incredible.
Yeah, and there was one that
is amazing.
There was one that did make it down to Lake Tahoe, and I mentioned that in the book. There was news then, but since then they've recorded a couple of others, and they've recorded several more in Utah in the Uinta Mountains. So again, there seem to be more making their way. Montana was the last state in the lower 48 to allow trapping, and they finally were forced to ban it. And I think that made a difference, because Wolverines are expert scavengers, and if there's bait in a trap somewhere, there's a very good chance they'll find it and they'll get caught. And that's been a significant source of mortality outside of the park here, and then more with larger numbers to deal with up in Canada, in British Columbia. So they may be on the move, I don't know, but they're certainly capable of moving. So we may get more good news if we hang in there.
Well, Katie reports 3 sightings of Wolverines, 2 on Triple Divide and 1 at Pegan. Count me extremely jealous. That's awesome. Who else has a Wolverine story to share? Feel free to jump in. Stacy? Got you.
This is my husband was up in the Pasayten about 5 years ago, solo hiking from the east side, from up by the Canadian border to the North Cascades. And within that wilderness area that had been hard hit by fires, he saw Wolverine by itself and kind of stopped to look at him. He knew it was for sure a Wolverine, and we were just kind of amazed because he spent a life in the woods and never seen one before. Yeah. So it's a family prize in our, that you got to see one. So.
Well, that's the Pasayten Wilderness, yeah. I think, yeah.
Yeah.
I worked up there with some of the researchers, and researchers down in central Idaho mountains and the White Clouds and Sawtooths and around there. And they were picking up Wolverines with home ranges of 700 to 900 square miles. That's almost the size of Glacier Park, right? 900 square miles. And that's why Wolverines are so rare and so hard to find. You could cover an area nearly the size of Glacier Park and there might be one male Wolverine in there, and he's keeping out the other guys. Now there might be a couple of female Wolverines if he's lucky, but that's it. You're not going to get more than that. The females are territorial too, and so that was the mystery, and that's also the conservation challenge. How do you conserve an animal that keeps itself so thinly spread out? And again, the answer is large landscapes and connections between them. And if Rebecca wants to jump in at any point, she's been involved one way or another with the creation of 3 new national parks, I think, in Mongolia. And I'm probably looking at the same kinds of strategies. Is that right, Rebecca?
Yeah, I just want to say I haven't really been involved in the creation of those parks. I just happened to be there while my Mongolian colleagues organized petitions to Parliament and got a whole huge landscape protected in northern Mongolia. And it happened to be the area with the highest concentration of Wolverine habitat in the entire country. So it was really fortuitous because we were able to put out cameras. And one of the things that's really striking to me, I've done 2 long-range ski expeditions through those parks, and we also have an unbaited camera grid of 50 cameras. So we just put out cameras for whatever wildlife happens to come along. We get Wolverines on all those cameras without any kind of bait or attractant. And on both instances with the ski expeditions, within an hour of setting out on the first day of a 30-day ski expedition, we were finding tracks, and we found tracks every single day of the ski expeditions in both cases, except for a few days here and there. So given I know that in Glacier, you could ski around for quite some time and probably not find any tracks for days on end. And, most of the wildlife camera setups here, if you want the Wolverines to come into them, you need to bait the cameras. So I don't know what's going on in Mongolia. I'm sure that they are not any less territorial there, but maybe the prey base is better or the density is just higher. They're having more kits. They're subsidized by Mongolian livestock herding practices and the carcasses that get left out during the winter. Something is up there. We don't know what it is, but there are a lot of Wolverines that seem to be more detectable there than they are here. So, yeah.
Are they the same size as the ones in Glacier?
We don't do any invasive studies of Wolverines there, so we've never handled or weighed them. But I have done a lot of measurements on pelts that people have. They will occasionally trap or shoot them. They don't do it really proactively, but they do it, and they do seem to be about the same size. Yeah, within the same size range.
Yeah.
So one of the many awkwardnesses of our virtual world is that in a real world we would be gathered and we would all have our books and we would have Doug sign them to us. He has been gracious enough to get a set of book plates from us so that if you would like to have your book signed, he will sign a book plate that we will then send to you and you can put in your book. So if you'd like a book inscribed, just use the chat feature and Jill and Emily will help make sure all that happens. Doug, thank you for doing that. This is an amazing crowd. Thank you so much to everybody for joining in and for some great Wolverine stories. Judy just sent one as well from Alaska, and John and Dana Donovan also had an Alaska viewing as well. Judy's was unfortunate in that it only had to be a glimpse. So Judy, we wish for you a longer experience next time. Yeah, that's it's an amazing. I have only seen one in my 40 years hiking in Glacier Park, and it was last year of all things. But I felt super fortunate to be able to have that experience for sure. Been a couple of questions, Doug, or just a general thought about you get the sense in the book that the park was perhaps less than enthusiastic about continuing the study do you know of other work in other places or after this study, kind of went away or was finished, are there other ideas about getting back to studying the Wolverine, or is that happening in other places?
Not really. There was a study of wolverines in response to high country recreation in central Idaho, because you can't imagine how much snowmobile use they get out of places like McCall and Ketchum and in those mountains. And this is exactly where Wolverine's den is, up in that hive of so-called playgrounds for snowcatters. And the idea, the Snowmobile Association actually helps support the project. And the idea being that there's a lot of country there. If we can find out more about, they're putting radios on Wolverines and putting radios on snowmobilers and skiers, backcountry skiers. And then mapping all this together and seeing how much they intersected. And the idea was, can we figure out a way to have areas that are secure from disturbance for wolverines? Because they did find out that a lot of human activity does increase their stress and increases the wolverines' activity during the difficult winter period. They're moving more, they're avoiding stuff. But there should be room to do both. You know, it wasn't your standard polarized environmental battle. And, but that was a limited number, and it's really hard to get that kind of data. There are a limited number of wolverines, and they have these huge home ranges. So that's the only one I know that was somewhat intensive. The rest have been putting out bait stations and collecting fur for DNA, and it's much more of a survey. That's been done in North Idaho and in Western Montana and the Bitterroots now, and some other places, but the Glacier study was kind of the only one that was intensive. Year after year, we got to know the parent wolverines, their offspring, the offspring's offspring, how their territories changed, how their movements changed in relation to the other animals in the area, and got a picture of into their lives. And that was really, really rewarding. I haven't seen anything like that take shape again. So, or in Canada. So I don't know what to say. I think we need to start marching through the streets, you know, like Wolverine Lives Matter or something, and having a gin up a little more funding to learn more about one of our most amazing creatures and one of the ones that most needs attention if it's going to last. So look, you got an animal that is a strong indicator of climate change because it depends on year-round cold temperatures in large territories, and it dens in deep lingering snow. And you've got an indicator of the need that so many other animals need, especially other mammals, of big connected landscapes. It can't exist in little islands like Glacier Park. Or most of the other reserves we have. It has to have that plus connections to other wildlands with other wolverines in them if they're going to have a genetically meaningful future. So it's very valuable from both those standpoints, plus it's just way cool. And, you know, I always say there's wild and then there's Wolverine. I mean, these guys are just, people would ask how they keep going up and down the peaks the way they do and why they go summit mountains in the middle of winter, and we don't know, but I'd love to find out. But I would tell people, for lack of any other guess, that there was probably some kind of radioactive rock they were munching on top of the peaks, and that's how they powered their lifestyle, because I couldn't figure out how else they got enough calories to live like that.
Yeah, no, they are a remarkable animal, and you know, we're at the Conservancy, we're really invested in research in the park because it's a hard thing for the park to fund on its own, and that's why we exist with you, only because of people like you who support the work. And so we're constantly looking for innovative projects, and many of you were able to join us last week for a links presentation from Alyssa Anderson. And they have camera traps, and they've been capturing a lot of wolverines on a number of their cameras. So keep an eye on that because she's going to be getting some really interesting data from that, including, you know, coincidentally, again, if there's some silver linings to some of this, you know, being able to have 130 traps out last year when the park was fully open, and having 150 traps, many of them in the east side, where the park is closed is going to give a unique opportunity to see about that, what happens when a park has a bunch of people on Iceberg Lake Trail and then the next year has nobody on Iceberg Trail. You know, how does that impact the animals? So thank you for your you guys' continued support for research. It's important. It's going to be a core value, continue to be a core value here at the Conservancy. And Jill, I think we have some other people who have been weighing in with some questions and comments.
Yeah.
Nora Gray here. Nora has her hand raised. Hey, Nora.
Hi there, everybody.
Nora.
Can you?
Hi, Randy.
Hi, Doug.
Our son, Spencer, is a mountaineer guy, and he and a buddy were in Glacier Park in snow season, and they were going up, and I can't remember quite where, but they were way up on high ridges. And all of a sudden they saw an animal, and it was a wolverine, and it came up toward them. And then it stood up on its hind legs and just looked at them, and then it dropped down and went around them, came back toward them, stood up again, went down, and you know, it was like it was surrounding them. They didn't feel fearful, but they just thought, well, it was so cool.
And then Doug, another time, this goes back a ways, all of our clocks are running, but during my undergraduate and law school days at the University of Montana and my summers, I worked for the Forest Service in the Bob Marshall as on a two-man roving trail crew with obstinate mules and a couple of horses. And this would have been probably 1973 or so. My colleague and I were on Larch Hill Pass, right on the Continental Divide, and we broke over Larch Hill Pass, and there was a snowfield there early in the season, and there were not one but two wolverines about 30 feet away, and they just looked at us for the longest time, and we of course were in awe, knew exactly what they were, and you know, then they toddled off, and that was the end of them. Those are the only two I've seen in my almost 70 years now.
Well, I got to tell one story about, I was studying mountain goats in the Swan Mountains, and I had a tent, and it was another winter study. I don't know how I get involved in being out in the middle of January all the time, but that was a great time to watch goats. But I would go between camps, so I set up one tent, and then I skied to another one I had set up in another valley. And I came back, and this happened twice. I came back, my tent was shredded, my sleeping bag was torn up, and feathers all over the place, and the little food I'd left there, I mean, the bears are in their dens, I wasn't worried about that, but the little food I had was all scattered and mostly devoured. And I thought, these damn wolverines are everything they say they are. You know, I could see why the trappers were always complaining about them raiding their trap lines and tearing up their cabins when they were gone, because that was my first experience with wolverines. I said, these guys they are badasses. But yeah, that's probably how a lot of people have encountered them through history, is what they wrecked. But go out to a place like Glacier Park, which is the stronghold in the lower 48 and the best laboratory we've got, and step into their lives, and a whole different creature appears. And as usual with carnivores, all the myths about their ferocity and their, you know, demonic tendencies to just go shred everything and cause trouble, they sort of evaporate, and you get to see the animal for what it is. And I think that holds for bears too. They're the bears of our imagination, and the wolverines of our imagination are much, let's just say the ones in our imagination are much more pervasive and much more powerful than the ones and deadly and all that stuff than the real ones out in the field. And
your reference to the swan is timely, because Shane in Big Fork is going to be working in the swan, hopefully on a wolverine study, fingers crossed. And what kind of advice would you give him about that, and about thinking about bit the research and maybe facing one of these animals face to face?
Run. You know, I've never yet uncovered, and before the book was finished or since the book came out, never yet uncovered a valid case of a wolverine attacking someone, unless it was cornered in like a trapper's cabin where it was in raiding food, or on a kill or a carcass. But I've never heard of them actively approaching or bothering anybody, if that's what you mean. But as far as advice on the swans, are Luke Lamar down there at the Swan Valley Connections was involved for a number of years, and I'm sure he knows, in a Wolverine survey, and has a good sense of where they are and where to be found. If that's what you're asking, sort of where to look. Doug, is that right? Or the
Well, there we go. Here's Shane.
Sorry. No, I'm actually going to be working with Luke this winter. Hopefully, if they get the funding and everything in place.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just wondering, for someone who's never encountered these animals face to face, just any weird recommendations.
I just say enjoy it. Yeah, you're lucky. I can't think of anything to sweat about. In fact, what I would worry about is in the winter. You said you'd be doing winter studies. If you find a concentration of tracks, you may be near a den between, say, early February on. And a mother will move her newborn young if she's disturbed. That's probably the one thing I would look out for. I certainly wouldn't. Again, I wrote about it, but we dug wolverine kits out of dens, and the mother still did. She would circle us, and a couple of times Dad even showed up, but they never bothered anybody. That doesn't mean you won't be the first guy out there. Yeah.
Doug, we've had a couple questions come through. There's been a couple about the trapping process, part of the research that I was going to get into, but I wanted to get back to Linda's question from earlier. You were kind of touching on that idea of connectivity, and Linda asked, do you know what the prospects are for Colorado, since it has those higher elevations, heavy snow, cooler summer temperatures?
Yeah, one made it down there from the Tetons. And I don't know that I wrote about it. It disappeared. I mean, I think I mentioned that, but what happened is this radio stayed on for a while. It visited the whole northern part of the state, but hung out again in National Park, in Rocky Mountain National Park at 10,000 feet. And then they lost track of it because the radio went dead. And like 3 years later, a guy killed a wolverine out on the flats of a cow pasture in North Dakota. They did DNA testing. It turned out to be that wolverine, M56. So what a journey he took from, the Wyoming down the Rockies through the Wind River into the Colorado mountains. My bet is that if we put some protections in place, pay more attention, think about travel corridors and connect, they'll make it on their own. But there has been a bit of a lobbying to reintroduce wolverines to Colorado, as they did very successfully with lynx. And that's been a very popular move in that state. The usual people opposed it, worried about an endangered listing, restricting development, ski areas were concerned, but livestock guys were concerned. The wolverines are not unlikely to get down and cause trouble, and they really stick to the high elevations in the Rockies. So that may happen, but it's funny how endangered species transplants and other activities on their behalf take place. Is they've got to have kind of pressure from the public. Otherwise, they're going to have endless meetings and talk it to death, and nothing's going to happen. The animals are going to have to do it on their own.
Katie and Susan both had similar questions about kind of how, if you have any insights on if trapping impacts the animals in any way throughout their lifetime. And Katie specifically asked, do Wolverines that you trap maybe over and over again get accustomed to food and then you keep letting them go?
Yeah, and you're talking about live trapping for research, correct?
Correct.
It's like with grizzly bears. There's some you catch them once, you're unlikely to get them again, at least for a long time. And we did this over enough years that we knew they were in the area, but they wouldn't go in a trap. They'd go right by it for the next 2 years. There were young ones or hungry ones that would be back at the trap in fairly short order and say, well, all that happens to me is I get jabbed with this little needle and then I go to sleep, and when I wake up, I'm gone. But in the meantime, I got to eat a heck of a lot of, deer carcass or beaver or whatever was the bait in there. So yes, you can, like a lot of studies, you can have an impact, good or bad, on the animals that you're trying to learn about. And none of us were really crazy about the, collar and follower, as they call it, where you've got to manhandle the critters and dart them and put a collar around their neck, which they always got off, by the way, pretty short order. And they were designed to fall off on their own if that didn't happen. But given their status of declining with a very small number and the fact that so little was known, how much room they need, how do they reproduce, what kind of survival among the young, all these things you have to build a model of how to help them, weren't available. So we justified doing the trapping. I don't, none of us are fans of it, and we may come up with some alternate technologies, but I don't know what else to say.
Sure.
I know that was a concern for the park too, and justifiably. So it's kind of species by species. I'm sure you've all seen bighorn sheep and other critters with big collars around their necks and all that, and ear tags, and it depends on what you're trying to learn and how important it is to that animal's long-term future. But I certainly won't try to justify it all the way. I'd rather be doing the right thing by Wolverines and see them all out there leading unfettered, happy lives. And that's what parks are supposed to be for. Unfortunately, you go outside of Glacier Park, it's doggone hard to find a Wolverine.
And technology is moving so rapidly. Last year with the Link study, Alyssa and her team at Washington State University went through each of the 575,000 photographs that they had manually, because AI just wasn't capable of doing the work at a scientifically significant quality that would work for research. 12 months later, they're now using AI because the technology has become so much better. So I guess it's Moore's law, right? So much more quickly that they're able to use AI this year, and including being able to use it to identify individual animals by fur marking. So I think there's some hope in that, and Rebecca, you mentioned it also, that you're doing more non-invasive or all non-invasive research as well. So it's interesting to see just in this very short period of time how much technology is playing a role in this.
Yeah, if I can add something here, I do think it's really great that you can get to the level of understanding individual Wolverines, where they are on the landscape and how they're related to other Wolverines just through genetics. So it's really, really good to be able to do things like that without hassling the animals in any way. That said, there are certain kinds of questions, as Doug alluded to, that you can only really answer with collars. And if you are at a point where your research needs or your management needs demand that kind of answer to that kind of question, I think there still is a role to carefully engage with more invasive handling of animals and research of animals. One thing I did want to add too, and this is speculative, but some of the Wolverine researchers I've worked with have speculated that the Glacier Park study actually had a beneficial effect on the Wolverine population here, because it may have subsidized the females calorically to the extent that they actually were able to reproduce and produce more kits. Wolverine female Wolverine reproductive biology, they mate in the summer, but they don't become pregnant until the winter. And the pregnancy rate depends on their body condition. And so there has at least been some speculation that subsidizing these female Wolverines with all of this trap bait allowed more Wolverines to be born in Glacier Park. So, sometimes the effects of invasive research are maybe can potentially be positive as well as negative.
Yeah. Jill, looks like we're getting a whole bunch of great questions here.
I know.
We have about 10 minutes left. I want to be respectful of everybody's time. We've got some great questions.
I know. I want to be able to get to all of them. Kind of switching gears, Susan had a great question about your writing process, Doug. She asked, do you write daily? Do you keep a journal? How do you assemble such powerfully captivating stories?
Thank you. Yeah, I just carry, I'm awful low tech. I carry a pen and a notebook and write things as I go in the field. And a lot of times when I sit down to write, I don't actually look at all those loaded up notebooks. The act of writing it, I'm thinking about it while I write. And sometimes in camp at night, as well as on the spot, that fixes it in my brain. Parts of which still function well enough that I can recall it when I'm writing. But other than that, I don't really have a process. It's good to have a background in wildlife biology and have done research, because a lot of the key is just being in comfortable situations with researchers. If you're out on a boat for weeks at a time in the ocean, or you're in camp or in a cabin in Glacier Park, it's amazing what comes out over coffee in the morning, or what comes out over a beer at night, or just on the trail. And it's the kind of thing, I'm not a smart enough journalist to think of these questions to ask, but all of a sudden a story starts, an account of something that happened, and I go, oh, that tied a whole lot of stuff together. And it just goes into the notebook. So thanks for the nice words about the writing, but I really don't know how that happens, if and when it does. Just write a lot.
Awesome. A few people have asked about progress on getting the Wolverine on the endangered species list, and if there's anything, if people want to be able to help or how they can get engaged. Do you have any advice on how people can help?
I'm trying not to get all political here. It's been very difficult for a number of years to get past this thing of, well, we need to study the situation some more, because we don't want to make that call. I mean, an animal with probably 35, 40 breeding females in the population is endangered as a population. But the debate goes on forever, and I don't know what one can do. I would say if there is certain kinds of development in areas that are known to have Wolverines, that might be worth looking into and seeing if you can comment on, not necessarily just pro or con, but can that be done in a way that accounts for the needs of Wolverines, lynx, other high country carnivores, that kind of thing, which have been ignored a lot. And I love hearing about the lynx study that you guys are supporting, because that's another creature that's been debated endlessly, needs a lot of that same kind of relatively undisturbed high country and connections to more of it. So You can get involved from that issue standpoint. You can get involved if there is a move to resume trapping at some point. I think that needs examination. And that's always, that's more, it turns quickly into a matter of identity and are you for or against trapping in general? Not does it apply to this particular animal, which is especially vulnerable to it. And it's just intensely political. And I really don't know. I wish I had the answer. My answer has always been, I'm no good at sitting in meetings and lobbying. Maybe some of you are more diplomatic and persuasive and can marshal your facts for a presentation. But my job is to get the information from the field out to folks like you. And since I'm not smart enough to tell you what to do with it, maybe you'll figure it out and then tell me. How's that for avoiding a?
So I think, I think it comes down to, the world is run by the people who show up. So I think whether you're liberal, conservative, whether you want them on the list, off the list, just don't cede that desire, whatever it is, to someone else. Find that opportunity to get your voice on things that you care about. I used to work for Senator Baucus, and that was a big thing for him. He wanted to listen to everybody, and so just have your voice. I think that's super important. So I wanted to ask Doug. I want to make sure we don't expire without hearing about your next book. And as I ask that question, I want to also ask Bethany's question, which is, what's your favorite past book that you've written, and then tell us a little about your next book.
My favorite past book is probably the Wolverine book.
Okay, you got to give us one other one.
Yeah,
I read that one.
The Fate of the Elephant.
You're not a very good salesman, Doug.
No, I'm not. Oh, look, I brought another book. You see that?
Yep.
Okay.
Tracking Gobi Grizzlies.
That came out after Wolverines through Patagonia. So, and Patagonia is publishing the next one, which is going to be on the nature of nature. Again, I'm going to get off the one species, one place at a time circuit and take on what it really means to be human. I call it our greater selves. This is all the way from the microbes, of which we have more in our bodies than human cells, to great whales, and how we think about nature and how we think about ourselves. It's a big, messy, probably delusional project, but I think it's worth doing. I'll tell you why. When I was at the University of Montana, as Doug mentioned, there were fewer than half as many people in the world. That's when I was learning about conservation. How do you save wild places and species? And all that rapidly became obsolete. And we're now in a time of unprecedented change with extinctions happening at anywhere from 1,000 to several thousand times the background rate. You know the story. I mean, we stand to lose 1/3 to 1/2 of the fauna on the planet. And most of it will be the big stuff. It's simply big animals are running out of room on a planet with 8 billion people, whose footprint extends across about 85% of the globe outside of the Arctic areas. So it's unprecedented. And I don't mean to, again, it's what used to be called sort of extreme environmentalism is just 60% of the carnivores weighing more than 35 pounds are threatened or endangered. 60% of the herbivores, plant eaters, are weighing more than 200 pounds on the planet, are threatened or endangered. And I could go on with the statistics. 90% of the primates, our closest kin, are declining. 60% are threatened or endangered. And it's a very dismal scenario. So rather than whine about it, I think what I can do is write books and try to take a fresh view of, again, our relationship with the rest of the living planet. And part of it is what I've been yakking about a bit tonight, which is go big or go home, make big connected wildlands. It doesn't exclude people. It may exclude certain kinds of human activities, but we've got to be thinking on a larger scale. We're still on this old island model. It's 150 years old of creating little reserves here and there and drawing a circle around them and saying we saved nature. We're done now. We can pat ourselves in the back and go home. And most of the extinctions that have happened since 1500 have been on islands. And I think we can all imagine the reasons why. You don't get replaced from nearby. You're in a small area, you're genetically limited, and there are going to be big changes in your habitat over time. The things we call catastrophes, the wildfires and floods and so on, but that over time are just part of the natural events. So build flexibility into the system, and then we need to kind of revise the idea of us being separate from and superior to all the rest of creation. It's not doing us any good. And, you know, there's an awful lot of people we're seeing this summer, and I was talking about it with Doug, that are enjoying the park and enjoying the outdoors. It's a refuge as well as a kind of wake up to what's out there. They haven't been here before in this kind of setting, and they're delighted that they can be. And it's one of the great boons of living here, to have a place like Glacier with the best, densest Wolverine population, the best and densest population of grizzly bears in the lower 48, and all the other carnivores that belong there, and all the prey species that are part of the same wildlife community. Wow, there aren't many places in the entire world with that intact, fully intact community, and that includes plant community. So, I don't know, just defend it every way you can. I'm so glad that all of you are part of the Conservancy, which does wonders for all those critters and helps shore up a future for all of them. And for those of us who just kind of love being out there. So thank you.
Well, we thank you, Doug, for spending some time with us and really for sharing with the world your commitment to wild places and wild things. You know, we talked a little bit earlier in this pandemic. A lot of people have found peace and serenity and growth and joy in those special places. And your writing has brought those to people in a way that is very, very meaningful. And your being willing to share this time with us here at the Conservancy is really special to me and to all of us. So thank you for doing that. Please feel free in this last couple of minutes, if you haven't gotten your book plate request in, take a minute to just type something in. We will be back at it again next month, and we've got books through the end of the year, and I'm actually already working on the 2021 season. Next month, we're going to take a little bit of a shift, and we're going to go to fiction. And we're going to read Christine Carbo's first book. I actually reviewed that book for Montana Magazine in 2015, believe it or not, 5 years ago. And that is The Wild Inside. It's a suspense story about Glacier National Park. I think you'll really enjoy it. It's hard to put down, though. I told Christine this weekend that she'd ruined my Labor Day because I picked up another one of her books. She now has 4. And then, of course, I couldn't go outside till I finished it. So, Doug Chadwick, thank you very much for your time. Oh, go.
Can I say, well, I was starting to get on our sermon here, but
You're the man. You can do anything you want.
Hey, I won't go away. You and I were talking, Doug, about the Highline Trail with 2,000 people on it a day. Is that right?
Yep.
And I've seen a lot of concentration of people this summer under unusual conditions, but they are coming to enjoy their park. They are coming to find a certain quality of life that is very important right now. But there's a ton of them, and we all deal with this loving it to death syndrome and trying to figure out how to cope with it. And I hear a lot of solutions from quotas to different reservation systems. You know what I don't hear anything about is make more parks. Make more national parks. Well, that is not part of the discussion. And we obviously need them. The tourism and recreation are driving Montana's economy. It's the #1 income earner. We've got everything going for us, from ecology to human health and fitness to, you know, all the things that come from exercise and being outdoors, to preserving biological diversity and all that that brings to us. Why aren't we talking about making more parks? So you guys are part of the Conservancy. Go help make more parks. That would help answer some of those questions about how to help Wolverines and other things. Please.
Make
That's
more
my
parks.
sermon's all done.
I see a t-shirt coming.
Yeah.
Well, thanks everybody for spending part of your evening with us, and thank you for sparing time and treasure with the Conservancy. It really means a great deal. It's so wonderful to see so many friends at these book club gatherings. Please continue to come, and as you think about the things you care about in the world, you know, I think that just, you know, show up and make sure your voice is valuable, no matter from what perspective, and make sure to have that voice. And Doug Chadwick, thank you for sharing a very valuable voice with us tonight, and we look forward to your next book, and we will bring you back. You will have no option.
And thanks for coming on, Rebecca. I still remember meeting you for breakfast in Ulaanbaatar. In Mongolia. Welcome to Montana, huh?
I don't know if that's a place or a food, but it sounds good.
No, it was great. All right, thank you all.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great evening. Good night.